Back under the truck, I've got a little bit of wiring work to do. Unbeknownst to me, while I was heating the bell housing, trying to get those dowel pins to release, right, let's see, right there, the torched this connector, the tang. I mean, I really think it would still work, but the the tang that keeps it in place is pretty much gone. And unfortunately, on this connector housing, that's where, and many Toyota connector housings, this is where the part number is. So I'm gonna have to do some research to figure out which connector housing this one actually is. This being a newer Toyota, I'm not familiar enough with it to know it offhand. So I got that, and the conduit basically just splayed out, and I'm hoping that these wires, that the insulation didn't melt through and then bond together. They are kind of sticking, so hopefully it's just the conduit's damage, not the actual wiring. So I'm going to strip this part of the harness back to here, replace it with fresh conduit. But I mean, I'm also going to inspect the wires here, make sure that they're not shorted or connected in any way. And then I'm also I might replace this section too. I'm going to have to pop that apart because that looks a little deformed. And then I will, once I get a new connector in, I'll show you how to depin, how to take these apart, depin them, and then one by one we'll swap out the pins. And then along with this work, I have a temperature sensor to go in the new oil pan for the transmission. So that's a one-wire signal, and I'm gonna cover it with its own sheathing, and then just zip tie it to this main harness coming down for the transmission until we get up to about here, and then from that point, I'm either gonna run it up into one of the plugs that's up on the firewall there, or try to find a bulkhead with a grommet and run it through the grommet. Haven't gotten that far yet, but once I figure that out, I'll show that to you. And then once this wiring bit is done down here, I'm going to get the transmission up, slap the torque converter back in it, and we're home the home stretch. So sometimes you can get lucky and just grab the old electrical tape and unravel it like that. Now sometimes these Toyota harnesses will actually wrap this tape inside. Yeah, so like this one is. See how it continues inside? They did that to secure the end of the conduit to the wire. So I'm going to replicate that with my new conduit. And pull off the damaged spot and then come back to here. And usually these are, wrapped down, and then sometimes they're underneath of the next level, next layer. So there's a few options. You can take a knife and slit it here, cut it around. I usually try to remove as much as possible, but when the wrap starts here and goes down, you can't really unwrap it. So you can see right there, it's underneath. It's underneath the next layer. So this is when you can take your utility knife and just be very gentle. You don't want to cut into the harness. You cut and then start peeling back like that. And just fillet it back, and then you get to a point, and then you can just tear it. Now, if I was rebuilding this harness, all this conduit and everything would be coming off, and I would be basically rewrapping it in the same style. But there's our damaged conduit that's coming out, and it looks like I got really lucky with this. These wires are totally intact. The insulation is not melted, no shorts, Hell yeah. So, I've got some 1/4 inch high temp nylon conduit here, split loom, whatever you want to call it. It has a little white tracer here to signify that's the nylon high temp. You know, it's good for engine harnesses. I wouldn't suggest buying the cheap Chinese shit from AutoZone or Advance or even on eBay. You spend a couple extra bucks and get this nicer stuff. I buy this from thewirebarn.com, and it's decently priced and worth the extra couple bucks for, you know, the spool of 100 foot or whatever. So I'm just lining it up to about where the old conduit ended, and just, you know, running it parallel to the wiring harness, and, you know, as it, and just conforming to it. And then I'm going to come up to about where it ended and just put my thumb there, and then grab a pair of scissors. You can use scissors, you can use any type of cutting device, and then just chop that piece. And then using the split loom, there are some really nifty tools to make this real easy if you're doing a long run of wire, but if not, you just slip it over one end and slide it on up till you get to that point. And then I'm actually going to pull this back off a little bit, because we're going to do that special securing wiring job up there like Toyota does. But on the other side, I'm going to start with, this is Scotch Super 33 Plus. This is my go-to electrical tape, mainly because of availability. It's got decent heat resistance, and it's available locally. I don't have to order it online. And I'm just going to do 2 to 3 wraps around the main harness there. Grab my pair of scissors, give it a slice, and fold it over. Now I really avoid, when I'm putting new tape down, just ripping it. It's such a cleaner finish when you cut it like that, and you really reduce the risk of it just starting to peel back up, because you don't have this fatigued section of the tape. Alright, now for this side, we're going to be right about here with our tape start, and we're going to go 2 to 3 turns around, or harness, and then we're going to literally just pushing the conduit over it, and then continuing that wrap. And you want to be careful that it doesn't get all twisted. I'm going to do 2 or 3 on the outside, and then grab the scissors and finish. Done. In the engine bay, I forgot that I actually had this, I ran some amp power through this grommet right here earlier, and that's going to be the perfect point to bring the single wire up to get inside the cab. So from here, I'm most likely going to wrap it up and then take it up through here. It's probably close to the center, closer to the driver's side, and then drop that wire down, and then zip tie it to that harness like I said, and then that'll take me down to the transmission. I need to confirm which side the temperature sensor goes on, and then that'll actually determine, you know, do I go to the other side and then down, or do I stay on this side and just keep going down on the side of the transmission. So when I get these spools of wire, they usually come with 1 or 2 zip ties. I always keep one on there just to keep it organized. I'm just going to unravel a bunch of this wire and then start mocking up the length that I need. And then when it comes time to getting to that grommet down there, I'm just going to give myself an additional, you know, 10 feet of wire, more than I could ever need to go from that grommet inside the cab and up into the dash, into wherever I end up placing that gauge. pod, or that temp gauge. Alright, so I got a decent amount of wire here. Just going to let the spool sit there. Now for just this mock-up purpose, I'm just going to string it around the heating water control valve here. Give myself what I think is about the appropriate amount of slack. Let that sit down there. And then I'm going to send the wire down and pick it up on the underside of the truck. Okay, I got my pan. That's about right, considering it's probably about midway to the front third where the where this connector is, and the blank spot on the pan is on the passenger side. So that's about here. So that means that the wire is going to come down. I'm going to keep the path with this harness because that's normally up, and then this section comes over the top of the transmission, and I'll just tag along for that and then bring it right down with that connector and just add an additional, you know, foot or so. So I've got plenty of slack here. So what I'm gonna do is string this up to about the slack that I want, probably about there, you know, plenty of extra. And then I'm gonna go back up top side, and then I'm gonna zip tie this here temporarily, or actually I'm gonna use some tape because that'll stick really nice. And then I'm gonna pull up the slack and get that slack out of this end of the wire. That way I have the slack on the inside to work with. All right, so coming inside, that grommet actually shows up right there, or it comes through right there. You can actually see that red wire. That's my amp wire. So the best way to do this is to use what's called a fish. It could just be a piece of stiff wire, and you feed it in from one side or the other, and you pull your wire through with the fish. So in this case, it's gonna be easier to pull it from the outside in. So that's what I'm gonna do. So this is the fish. I'm gonna wrap the wire through there like that, bend it over, and then add some tape right here. Feed this end through the grommet, and then ultimately pull this wire up to a mark that I have, and then the length left out here in the engine bay will be what I need to route up and down to the transmission. And sometimes these grommets with this fish in particular can be a little tough to pull through, so a little bit of lubricant like penetrating oil, sometimes even just brake clean, just something to get the system going, and then once that ends through, usually it's smooth sailing. Okay, so we'll just start working it into that grommet. Try to push as much as I can through. I feel like I'm hitting something, probably some of the material on the firewall. Let's switch over to the inside. Okay. So there it is. Oh, it actually went underneath into the harness there. So I'm gonna have to run back outside, pull it back a little bit, and then come back in here and grab it. Alright, cool, that was just enough. I'm gonna reach in, bend it up a little bit, right there. I'm gonna send it. Alright, I had to add a little bit of spray lube on it. It's starting to get a little tough. So now, I should be able to pull the whole rest of it through. There it is. Alrighty, so inside for this gauge, I decided I'm gonna mount this gauge right here. Kind of out of the way. I don't ever really have much to put in this little cubby hole anyway, so that'll be perfect right there. And so what I'm gonna do is take this panel out and 3D print an insert here that I can drill a small hole, probably on the left side, and then run all my wires through that hole, and then double side tape, or maybe even just Velcro the 3D printed insert into here, and that'll give me a little bit of real estate to put maybe a switch or something if I end up needing anything else down here. So to take this thing out, it's been a long time since I've taken the center console out, but I'm pretty sure you can't pop this out without taking the center console apart. I could be wrong, but when I'm putting pressure on this thing, it doesn't really feel like it wants to give. So to take this thing out, you gotta get to the bolts. I think there's 4 bolts, couple pins, and maybe a couple screws. This thing comes straight up like that, and the front comes straight up. It's got those little push pins. I've got some hardware in here that just comes right out. So we got 2 M6 10mm head bolts there. And in here, we've got 2 M6 bolts there. I believe back down here, we've got some screws on either side, and then there should be a plastic insert piece right there. And looks like there's one on the other side as well. So I'm gonna buzz out all that stuff, and we'll see if there's anything else that needs to come apart. So for these plastic inserts, actually you can unthread them, but you see it's too loose, so you gotta hold that outside, and you'll see it gets to that cam point, and then the assembly comes apart. Real easy. Yep, just like I remembered. 2 small screws in the back here. You have to slide the front seat forward to get these out. 1 on each side. Alright, and I also forgot that this has to come up. This whole piece comes straight out, just like the front part. We've got some of those push pins that just clip together, and then 2 more M6 bolts there. Alright, so now this whole guy should be able to lift up the back, and then slide it towards the back of the truck. And then you can get access to this and see if there's any mounting tabs or screws. So I do have wires going to these USB chargers, and there's also the wires going to the built-in cigarette lighters, 12 volts. I gotta be mindful of that. I'm gonna fish around back and see if there's any clips or something that I can't see or I can't feel. Alright, so you may be able to do this without taking the whole center console loose, but this would make it easier. There's 2 tabs on the bottom here, these 2 guys. Those 2 need to be pressed in, so in, and then you tilt it up, and then these 2 tabs engage 2 slots up here to keep it located. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect this, take this inside, take some measurements, get something modeled up.